All right, welcome back to episode 7. Let's talk about associative arrays. So right now you can see our entry point, index.php, simply loads our view, or the template. And if we take a look at that, it's nothing but HTML. Okay, great. So we have a good starting point. Now, you learned about an array. So we had animals, and that can be a dog, a cat, something like that. However, we can also create an associative array. And the only difference is we assign a key to each one of these values. Like this. Imagine we were describing yourself, or any person. Okay, well, we want to say how old they are. Let's do me. I'm 31. Well, I could do 31, like we did before, and my hair color is brown. But notice that it doesn't really describe that. If I come back to this, what is brown actually referring to? Is that my skin color? Is that my hair? Is that my favorite color? We don't have that information. So in these sorts of situations, an associative array would be preferable. So let's switch over to that. But real quick, notice how you got your first introduction to a number or an integer. So up until now, we've only dealt with strings. But also, if we use a number, we do not store it within quotes. That would be the string version of 31, but we want the integer itself. So we do 31 like so. No quotes means it's not a string, it's an integer. Okay, but anyways, if we were to rewrite this now, the only difference is we give it a key. So age, and then we use this little arrow syntax here. Equal sign and then greater than. Equal, greater. Now, the value is 31. And that's it. That's an associative array. So it consists of any number of key value pairs. So let's do another one. My hair color will be brown. And maybe my position or career is web developer. Okay, this looks good. So populate it with your own information, and you now have your first associative array. Now, we're going to load our view file, which instantly has access to your person variable. And here we could say, once again, within an unordered list, so we could say PHP for each person as, and what do each of these items represent? Maybe a feature? Okay. Well, so far you've learned to do it like this, for each item within the array. So if we try this, we're going to use the shorthand again, like you learned. And now within here, we will echo out the feature. Okay, so well, let's see what we get here. Let's boot up a server, like you learned. And if you're using iTerm, you should be able to command click on this on the Mac. Otherwise, just copy and paste that into the browser. Okay, so we're getting the values here. But we still want the key. So maybe ideally we have the key. If I switch back, this section right here, that would maybe be in a strong tag. And then this section would be the value itself. Okay. Well, how do we fetch the key? Right now, this is the value. Okay, well, we do it like this. For each person as, and it's basically going to take the form of this. For each item within this array as the key and then the value. And notice how this shape, it's exactly like you see here, the key and then the value. So now for each iteration, key will be equal to age and then hair and then career. And then value will be equal to 31, brown, and web developer. Okay, but in general, using kind of generic variable names isn't a good practice. It might be fine for now, but when you come back to it, it's that much harder to remember, well, what does val actually refer to? So as a good rule of thumb, be specific. In this case, we'll say, once again, is this a feature or trait? I don't know the term. We'll say feature. And then in this case, maybe value would be appropriate here. So we have the feature, and then, I don't know, what would be a good term? This is part of being a web developer, is figuring out how do I name things. And what you're going to find is that's actually pretty hard. So thinking of the proper name or the proper representation of something is a big component to being a developer. You'll spend a lot of time on this. And those who spend more on it generally have better products, or at least easier to understand products. But you'll learn about that quite a bit more. Anyways, feature and value is fine. Or you could even do key feature if you think the value itself should be called the feature. Any of these are fine. So anyways, I'm going to put the key within a strong tag, and then the feature itself outside. Now, if I go back to Chrome and give this a refresh, there you go. You've now used a for each statement to filter through an associative array. Okay, but let's do one more thing before we finish up. So far, you've created an array and you've done nothing to it. But in real life, you sometimes need to remove items from the array. You may need to append items to that array. Well, you could of course always update the original array if you can, but what you'll find is, yes, sometimes this array is coming from the outside world, and you can't manipulate it directly. Instead, you will push to it. So we could do this. Add a new key to this array, and what else do we want? How about name? And that will be equal to myself. Okay, so we had a person array, and now we're pushing a new item onto this array, where the key is name and the value is Jeffrey. So that means if we come back, it should instantly update, and it does. We can see that here. But you might be thinking, well, what if you don't have an associative array? For example, if we go back to that animals idea, where we have dog and cat, well, what would you do here? What is the value you put here? Because we don't have a key. Well, in that case, leave it off entirely. So you could say elephant. And now animals is equal to dog, cat, and elephant. Okay, so as you're working on your code, from time to time, you're going to want to see what the output is, what the current state of a variable is. So here's a nice and easy way to do that. You can say, I'm going to show you two different things. So you learned about echo, right? So if we want to see maybe what the age value is, I could say, let's comment out this view. And real quick, in PHP, when we say comment out, that means we don't want to execute this code. And this is good when you're kind of tinkering around. And in this case, I don't want to load the template here. I just want to echo out a value. So I'm going to comment that out using 2 forward slashes. And generally within your code editor, it'll change to gray, which is sort of an indication that it will not be executed. Okay, so if we were to echo out the person's age and come back and refresh, we get 31. But maybe you want to echo out the person variable itself. Well, this isn't going to work, and this will trip you up at first. Notice array to string conversion. So when you use echo, it's going to echo a string. But we've already learned that age is a string, but this array, it's not a string, it's an array. So what's happening is echo expected a string, but it got an array, and it's letting you know, hey, I really don't know what to do. You probably did something wrong. So in situations where you're not echoing anything overly primitive like a string or an integer, instead, you'll want to use a function called var_dump. So remember, we haven't learned too much about functions just yet, but as a basic rule of thumb, when you call them, you append these parentheses right here. So a function that does not accept any argument would be called like this, but in our case, we do want to give it an argument. What are you dumping? So we're going to give it the person variable. Okay, so if we switch back and run that, you're going to see something just like this. So still a little difficult to read, but there are options we can use to make it quite a bit nicer. But still, we can see the age is 31, the hair is a string, which is called brown, the career is a string of 13 characters, called web developer, and name is a string called Jeffrey. So notice you have strings here, and then also you had your first integer represented by int. Now, if you want this to read a little bit better, there's a number of things you could do. Of course, later in your learning, you'll learn about packages you can pull in that will style it really nicely. You could also, remember, you have HTML, so if you wanted something like this, if you wrap it within pre-tags, well, if you're familiar with pre-tags, that will preserve the formatting. So if we refresh, yeah, it looks a little bit nicer, doesn't it? So lots of options there. You can even pull in maybe a browser extension that will format it for you automatically. You could put this in a function, which maybe we'll talk about in the next lesson. You have lots of choices. But for now, just accept that var_dump is something you can call to literally dump the value for anything and everything. So let's bring back the require, and I want to show you one other thing. So in this case, we dumped the person variable, but then we continued on and loaded the view. Well, sometimes what you're going to find is you just want to dump the value and basically exit immediately. Don't continue on past this. I just want to get to this point. I want to see the output, and then I'm done. Don't do anything else. Well, in PHP, we have a function called die. So you may see this from time to time. So what's going on here? Well, think about it. Person is your variable. var dump is a function, but die is a function as well. So it would be just as if we did something like this, hello world. If I come back, we're going to see hello world, and notice we did not continue. So it doesn't matter what comes after here. It doesn't matter because we died. We didn't get to that point, so you'll never see anything else. So this is very useful. Now in our case, we wanted to die and then var dump that value. So you could do this. You could do var dump person and then just call die immediately after. That would be an option. Or, yeah, what a lot of people do is they die and then they var dump the person directly within it, and we'll get the same thing. So that's good to know. And in fact, in the next lesson, we'll create a little function that we could call maybe something like dd that behind the scenes will do this for us. That'll be useful. Okay, so in closing, you know how to create an associative array. You now know how to push a new item to the array. But what about remove? Maybe we want to get rid of my age. Okay, for an array, you can use unset for that. Unset person age. And now if we come back and refresh, notice it's no longer represented here. Okay, so here's your homework. Imagine that maybe you're preparing a task. Okay, so like a to-do item. Okay, you might call the variable task. Now I want you to make that equal to an associative array that contains details about the task, including the title of the task, like go to store or go to the mall, when it is due, and that can just be a string of today or tomorrow or next week, who it's assigned to, that could be yourself or your wife or anyone, and then finally, whether or not it's completed. Now, how do we represent completed? Well, completed would be like yes or no. So it's okay. You can use the string yes or the string no for that. However, in the next lesson, we're going to talk about Booleans, which will give you a better option in that case. And then after that, we'll talk about functions. And after that, we'll talk about something else. So I will see you then.